My name is Nadia Chen. I am 32 years old. I live in San Francisco, California. And I need to tell you about the night I sat at a rehearsal dinner in a private room at a restaurant in Scottsdale, Arizona, surrounded by people who had spent years treating my life choices like an embarrassing footnote, and I quietly reached into my bag and placed a single piece of paper on the dinner table. One piece of paper. The paper had a number on it. The number was $50 million. And the number was the current valuation of the company that my parents had been calling a stupid hobby for 4 years. I want to tell you what happened when the room went quiet. I want to tell you about my sister's mother-in-law, a woman named Patricia Whitmore, who had spent the entire dinner asking politely pointed questions about my career in the specific way of someone who has already decided the answer is not impressive and is simply waiting to confirm it. I want to tell you about my mother's face, about my father's face, about my sister Amanda's face, which was the most complicated of all of them because Amanda knew things that the rest of the table did not know, including the fact that the company on that paper had been built partly with money that I had never once asked to be paid back. But I cannot start at that dinner table. I have to start at the beginning. I have to start with the kitchen table in our house in Fremont, California, when I was 8 years old, watching my father do the family finances on a yellow legal pad every Sunday evening, and understanding something about numbers that I have never stopped understanding since. Numbers are honest. They do not have feelings. They do not have favorites. They do not look at you and see a second daughter or a disappointment or a phase. They simply are what they are. And if you understand them well enough and work with them honestly enough and build with them carefully enough, they will tell the truth about you even in rooms where everyone else has decided the truth is something different. That is the story I am about to tell you. The story of a girl who understood numbers in a family that did not understand her, and what happened when the numbers finally got loud enough for everyone in the room to hear. Before we start, like this video right now if you believe that the work you do in quiet, in the years when no one is watching and no one is impressed, eventually speaks for itself. One tap, do it now. Subscribe to this channel and hit the bell. We are here every week with a story exactly like this one. Comment below, have you ever had someone dismiss something you were building, something you knew was real, and had to wait for the moment when the dismissal ran out of room? Tell me. I read everything. Now, let me take you to Fremont, California, to a house on a street with big oak trees, to a Sunday evening and a yellow legal pad and the beginning of everything. I need to tell you about my family before I tell you about anything else, because the company and the $50 million and the dinner table moment are all outcomes. They are the end of a long story that started in a specific kind of childhood that built a specific kind of person. My parents are David and Linda Chen. They immigrated to the United States from Taiwan in 1987, 2 years before I was born. My father came with an engineering degree from National Taiwan University and a specific and serious belief that hard work in America produced results in a way that hard work in other places did not always guarantee. He had grown up in modest circumstances in Taipei. His father had worked in a factory. His mother had sold vegetables at a market near their apartment. The distance between that life and a life of stability in America was the distance he measured everything against. He got a job at a semiconductor company in Silicon Valley within 8 months of arriving. It was not a senior position. It was a technical role that paid a reliable salary and came with health insurance and the specific comfort of institutional stability. He stayed at that company for 27 years. He moved up slowly and steadily through the ranks in the way of someone who trusts incremental progress over dramatic leaps. He became a senior engineer. He was respected. He was never famous, he was never rich. But he was stable, and stability for my father was the highest possible achievement because instability was the thing he had escaped. My mother Linda was quieter than my father in most ways but more precise in her opinions. She had worked as a bookkeeper for a small import business before having children and had the specific worldview of someone who has spent years making sure columns balance. She believed in categories. She believed that things belonged in their proper place. She believed that a life well organized was a life well lived. I was born in 1992. Amanda was born in 1995. From the outside, we were a standard immigrant success story: 2-story house in Fremont, good public schools, family dinners most nights, parents who worked hard and sacrificed and wanted their children to have more than they had. From the inside, there was a mathematics to our family that I understood before I had words for it. Amanda was the feeling of the family. She was warm and social and naturally performed the emotional connections that our family needed. She was the one who remembered relatives' birthdays without being reminded. She was the one who cried at the right moments and laughed at the right moments and made the family gatherings feel like gatherings rather than obligations. My parents did not love Amanda more than me. I want to be clear about that, but they understood Amanda more easily. She was legible to them in a way that I was not. I was the thinking of the family. I was the one who noticed patterns. I was the one who asked questions that made adults in the room go slightly quiet, because the questions revealed that I had been paying attention to something they had not realized was visible. I was the one who, at 8 years old, asked my father why he always budgeted the same amount for groceries in January as in December when December had more meals in it. He had looked at me for a long second. He had said, "You are right." He had adjusted the budget. He had not made a big deal about it. He had just adjusted the budget and moved on. But I had noticed. I noticed that I could see something he had missed, and I filed that away. I was not a lonely child. I had friends. I was reasonably social. But I had a private interior world that was much larger than what I showed, and the thing that lived in that interior world was numbers and systems, and the specific pleasure of understanding how things worked at the level underneath the surface. I loved math the way some kids love music, not because I was supposed to, not because I was being pushed, because when I was doing it, time disappeared and the part of my brain that was always slightly restless went completely still. My teachers noticed. By middle school, I was several years ahead in mathematics. By high school, I was taking classes at the community college because the high school had run out of things to offer me. My father was proud of this in his specific way, which was not effusive but was real. He would mention my math results to relatives at family gatherings in the way of someone reporting a solid quarterly outcome. He understood the value of what I was doing. He believed it was the path to a good engineering job at a stable company and a stable life. He had a very clear picture of what my future looked like. The picture looked like his life, but better compensated. I did not have the heart to tell him that his picture and my picture were not the same picture. Not yet. Amanda's picture was simpler in the way that everyone around us found easier to understand. Amanda was going to college for something involving people, communications or education or social work, and she was going to meet someone good and start a family, and be happy in the warm, visible way that makes people around you feel good about the future. Amanda did all of these things more or less on schedule. She went to Cal State for communications. She graduated in 3.5 years. She met a man named Brandon Whitmore at a friend's birthday party when she was 24. Brandon was from Scottsdale, Arizona. He had a good job in commercial real estate. He was handsome in a solid, reliable way. He was exactly the kind of man that my parents, from the first dinner where they met him, visibly relaxed about. I want to tell you about that dinner, because it is the first place I understood the specific dynamic that would eventually produce the rehearsal dinner moment. Brandon brought his parents to meet our family when he and Amanda had been together for 8 months. His father was Tom Whitmore, who had built a mid-sized commercial real estate company in the Phoenix area, and who was comfortable in the way of men who have been financially comfortable long enough that they have stopped thinking about it. His mother was Patricia Whitmore, who was the more precise of the two, and who had an evaluating quality behind her warmth that I recognized, because I have the same quality in myself. The dinner was at a restaurant my parents had chosen carefully, not too formal, not too casual Chinese food, because my mother wanted to be on familiar ground. Introductions were made, the evening proceeded. And at some point, relatively early, the conversation turned to what everyone did professionally. Tom Whitmore talked about his real estate company. Brandon talked about his commercial real estate work. My father talked about his engineering position. My mother talked about her bookkeeping work at a small local business she had been with for 11 years. Amanda talked about her communications coordinator job at a non-profit. And then Patricia Whitmore turned to me with the specific polite focus of someone who has been moving around the table and has arrived at the last stop. She said, "And Nadia, what do you do?" I was 28 at the time. I had been building my company for 2 years. It had not yet become what it would become, but the foundation was solid and the growth metrics were clear to anyone who understood what they were looking at. I said, I run a software company. We build financial analytics tools for small and medium businesses. Patricia said, oh, how interesting. Is that something you do on your own or with a team? I said, we have 14 employees currently. We are in our second year of operation. She nodded in the way of someone receiving information that is being filed but not elevated. She said, that is brave. Starting something like that is very brave. Brave is the word people use when they want to acknowledge something without endorsing it. Brave means they think you might be making a mistake, but they admire your willingness to make it. I said, thank you. And then Patricia turned to my mother and asked about the neighborhood, and the conversation moved on. I watched my mother's face during that exchange, not the part where I was speaking, the part after when Patricia moved on. My mother had the expression of someone who was relieved the subject had changed. Because here is the thing. To my parents in that room at that dinner, with these people who represented a kind of stability and success they understood and respected, my company was the thing that made the Chen family look uncertain. Tom Whitmore had a real estate company. Brandon had a real estate career. My father had a 27-year engineering career. These were legible things. These were stable things. These were things that produced a reliable answer when someone asked what you did. What I did produced a complicated answer that required explanation, and that most people received with the specific polite uncertainty of someone who is not sure whether to be impressed or concerned. My parents had been receiving this uncertainty from people they cared about impressing for 2 years. They were tired of it. And they were going to tell me so, not for the first time and not for the last, approximately 3 months after that dinner. Let me tell you what the company actually was. Because the stupid hobby comment did not come out of nowhere, and it did not come out of cruelty exactly. It came from a specific and genuine incomprehension. My parents looked at what I was doing, and they could not see what I was building because they did not have the vocabulary for it. And when people cannot see something, they describe it as nothing. The company was called Clear Ledger. The idea came to me in my last year of my MBA program at UC Berkeley. I had spent the previous 4 years working at a financial software company in San Francisco, where my official title was product manager, but my actual function was the person in the room who understood both what the engineers were building and what the clients actually needed, which are 2 things that in software development are frequently not the same thing. I watched year after year how our enterprise clients used our software versus how our small business clients used it. The enterprise clients had teams. They had financial analysts who understood the tools. They had infrastructure for absorbing complexity. The small business clients were often a single owner or a 2-person accounting team trying to run a growing business and understand their own financial picture at the same time. The tools we were selling them were built for the enterprise use case and had been scaled down for small businesses in the way that scaling things down is not the same as building things for. The result was that small business clients were paying for software that was too complex for their actual needs, underusing the features they had, making financial decisions based on information they did not fully understand, and frequently not catching problems early enough because the dashboard that was supposed to show them a clear picture was showing them a complicated one. I spent 4 years watching this problem and thinking about the solution. The solution was not to make the enterprise tools simpler. Simplified enterprise tools were still enterprise tools in a smaller package. The solution was to build from the other direction, start with the actual decision-making process of a small business owner, understand what questions they needed answered on a given day. What does my cash flow look like for the next 60 days? Where am I losing margin? Which of my product lines is actually profitable, and which one only looks profitable? What would happen to my runway if I hired 2 more people this quarter? Build the tool around those questions rather than around the accounting functions. I left my job at 29 with 18 months of savings, a detailed product specification that I had been writing in evenings and weekends for 8 months, and an early commitment from a small business owner friend of mine who had been listening to me, described this problem for 2 years, and who said he would be my first client if I built it. I rented a small office space in the Mission District in San Francisco. I hired 2 engineers through a network connection. I started building. My parents were told about this decision over a family dinner in Fremont. I told them after the meal, which was the correct instinct because the conversation that followed would have made eating difficult. My father put his teacup down. He said, "You left your job." I said, "Yes." He said, "A good job, with a salary." I said, "Yes." He said, "To build software by yourself." I said, "With 2 engineers I hired, and I have a first client committed." My mother said, "Nadia, what happens if this does not work?" I said, "I have 18 months of runway. I have a product that addresses a real gap in the market. I have a client who has already committed to a paid trial. If it does not work in 18 months, I will go back to a job and the experience will make me better at it." My father said, "And your savings?" I said, "Are mine to risk." He did not say anything for a moment. Then he said, "This is a hobby, this is not a business." That was the first time he said it. He did not say it with anger. He said it with the specific certainty of someone who has a clear definition of what a business is, and what I was describing did not fit that definition. A business, in my father's understanding, was a thing with proven revenue and an established market and years of operation behind it. What I was describing was an idea with 2 employees and 1 not yet paying client. He was not wrong about the facts. He was wrong about what the facts would become. But I could not show him that yet. The only way to show him was to build it. So I went home and I kept building. The first version of ClearLedger launched 16 months after I left my job. It launched with 7 clients, which was 6 more than the one I had started with. The revenue was small, $4,000 a month, which was not enough to be comfortable, but was enough to be real. Real in the sense that actual businesses were paying actual money for something I had made. My first employee review from one of those clients was from a restaurant owner in Oakland who had been using spreadsheets to track her financials for 6 years. She said, "I finally understand where my money goes. I knew I was hemorrhaging somewhere and now I can see it." I printed that review. I put it on the wall of my small office, not because I needed the validation, because it was the specific confirmation I had been working toward. Someone's business was clearer because of something I built. That was the thing. That was always the thing. The second year, we went from 7 clients to 31. The revenue went from $4,000 to $22,000 a month by the end of the year. I added 2 more engineers and a customer success manager. The product got better month by month because I was obsessive about client feedback, and I built a process for turning that feedback into specific product improvements within 6 to 8 weeks of receiving it. The clients started referring other clients. Word of mouth in the small business community is not nothing. If a tool genuinely helps someone understand their own business better, they tell other business owners, because small business owners talk to each other constantly about the things that work. We were not the biggest thing in the world. We were not a viral startup. We were not being written about in TechCrunch. But we were growing, steadily, honestly, in the way that I believe in, building something that genuinely helps people and letting the quality of the help do the marketing. My parents saw none of this. Not because I was hiding it. I told them the numbers when the numbers started moving. I told them about the clients. I told them about the revenue growth. My mother's response to the revenue update at 12 months was, "But do you have health insurance?" I said yes. I had gotten my own health insurance on the first day I left my job. This is not a complicated thing to do. But to my mother, health insurance was the marker of legitimate employment, and the fact that I had obtained it myself rather than through an employer was not the same as having it through an employer. My father's response to the revenue update was, $22,000 a month is not enough to be stable. He was right, it was not yet stable money, but it was growing money, and the difference between stable and growing is the difference between a paycheck and a company. He understood the first and not the second. The stupid hobby comment, the real one, the one that landed the hardest, came in month 23 of building ClearLedger. We had just signed our 50th client. I had a team of 11. The monthly revenue was $48,000, which was approaching the point where I could pay myself a reasonable salary for the first time since leaving my job. I had also had my first real conversation with a venture capital firm, a preliminary conversation, not an offer, but a conversation where someone in a position to write a check had sat across from me and asked serious questions for 90 minutes. I drove down to Fremont on a Sunday. I was excited. I was genuinely, openly excited in a way that I did not often allow myself to be, because I had learned that excitement in front of my parents regarding the company produced a specific kind of dampening response that I found difficult to absorb. But this felt like a milestone worth sharing. I sat at the kitchen table with my parents, and I told them about the 50th client and the revenue trajectory and the VC conversation. My father listened. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Nadia, when are you going to get a real job?" My mother added, "You have been doing this hobby for almost 2 years. At some point you need to think about your future." I said, "I am building my future. I just told you the numbers." My father said, "Numbers on paper. What happens when the clients leave, when a bigger company builds the same thing?" I said, "That is a risk in every business." He said, "It is not a risk in a job. In a job you have security." I said, "You have the security of an employer choosing to keep you. That is not the same as not having risk. That is just a different location for the risk." He did not have an answer for this, but he also did not change his position. My mother said, "We worry about you. Amanda has a real life. Brandon a real job, a future. We want that for you." Amanda's life was the comparison. Amanda, who was by this point engaged to Brandon, who had a communications job at a non-profit and a fiancé in commercial real estate. Amanda's life was legible. Mine was not. I drove back to San Francisco that evening. I sat in my car outside my apartment for a few minutes. And I thought about the word hobby. A hobby is something you do with your time that does not produce serious consequence. A hobby is watercolor painting on Saturday afternoons. A hobby is making sourdough bread. A hobby is the thing you do when the real work is done. I had $48,000 in monthly recurring revenue and 50 clients and 11 employees, and a preliminary conversation with a venture capital firm. None of that was hobby. But I could not make them see it. Not yet. Not until the number got big enough that even the people who did not speak the language could understand it. So I went back to building. And 3 months after that Sunday in Fremont, Amanda called me and told me the wedding was going to be bigger than they had originally planned, and that she needed help with the money, and that Mom had suggested I could contribute. And that is where the forced payment part of this story begins. Amanda's engagement to Brandon Whitmore was official by January of the year I turned 31. The proposal happened in Sedona, Arizona, which I know because Amanda sent me approximately 40 photographs from the evening via text message at 11 p.m. on a Tuesday while I was reviewing our Q3 revenue projections. The ring was beautiful. Brandon looked happy. Amanda looked the way Amanda always looks when good things happen to her, which is radiant in the specific way of someone who genuinely expected good things to happen and is not surprised, but is fully available to the joy of it. I called her the next morning. She said, "I know it was late when I sent those. Sorry." I said, "Do not apologize. I am so happy for you. He is a good one." She said, "He really is." She was right. Brandon Whitmore was genuinely a good person. I had spent enough time around him by that point to know that he was not performing goodness for the family audience. He was consistent when no one was watching, which is the only test that actually matters. The wedding planning began immediately because Amanda was that kind of person. She had a vision. She had been building it for approximately as long as she had known marriage was a concept that applied to her life. She knew the color palette and the season and the general scale. She wanted something beautiful and meaningful and large enough to include everyone who mattered, but not so large that it became a production rather than a celebration. The number they landed on was 220 guests. In Scottsdale, Arizona. In April. 220 guests in Scottsdale in April is not an inexpensive proposition. The total wedding budget that Amanda and Brandon had discussed was $120,000. They could contribute $40,000 themselves. Brandon's parents were contributing $40,000. That left $40,000 that needed to come from somewhere. Amanda called me on a Wednesday evening in February. She said, "I need to talk to you about something and I want to be honest about it." I said, "Okay." She said, "Mom and Dad can contribute $15,000. That still leaves $25,000. Mom suggested that since you are doing well with the company, maybe you could help with the rest. I want to sit with this sentence for a moment, because the sentence contains several things that need to be examined. First, Mom suggested, not Amanda suggested. Mom, which meant my mother had made a calculation and had sent Amanda to present it, which was the family's standard operating procedure for difficult requests. The person most likely to receive the request sympathetically was sent to make it. Second, since you are doing well with the company, this was the first time in 2 years that the company had been characterized as something other than a hobby or an uncertainty. It had suddenly become the source of a $25,000 contribution. The instrument of my financial usefulness had shifted. Third, maybe you could help with the rest. The phrasing was careful, but the amount was not small. $25,000 was a significant sum. It was money that I had and that I could contribute without it catastrophically affecting the company, but it was money that the company needed. We were in a growth phase. Every dollar we kept in the business accelerated the growth trajectory. I want to be honest about what I felt in that phone call. I felt several things simultaneously. I felt the warmth of wanting to do this for Amanda, because I loved my sister genuinely, and her wedding mattered to me. I felt the complicated irritation of the specific calculation that had been made, the way the company had been useful enough to be tapped, and not real enough to be respected. I felt the beginning of something else, something quieter, a thought that was forming itself slowly into a plan. I said to Amanda, "Can I ask you something directly?" She said, "Of course." I said, "Is this what you want to ask me, or is this what Mom wants you to ask me?" There was a pause. Amanda said, "Both." At least she was honest. I said, "And you understand that $25,000 is a significant contribution?" She said, "I know, and I would not ask if I did not think you could manage it. I know the company is going well." I said, "The company is going well, and the company also needs every dollar it has right now to grow the way it should grow." She said, I know, Nadia, and if you cannot, I understand, I will figure something else out. But here is the thing about sisters. When your sister says I will figure something else out in a specific tone, you know what she means. She means she will not figure something else out. She will reduce the wedding. She will cut the guest list. She will make choices she does not want to make because the money is not there. And you know that if you do not contribute, the story that gets told in your family is not the story about a company that needed its capital for growth. The story that gets told is the story about the sister who would not help. I said, "Let me think about it for a few days." Amanda said, "Take all the time you need." I thought about it for 4 days. And then I called her back and told her I would contribute $25,000 to the wedding budget. I want to be clear about why. Not because of the family pressure, though the family pressure was real. Not because I was afraid of the story that would be told if I said no, though I was aware of that story. I did it because I loved Amanda. Genuinely, she was my sister, the one who had grown up alongside me in the same house with the same parents and the same Sunday dinners, and who was, despite all the ways we were different from each other, the person who knew me most completely in the world. When she was happy, I felt something real about that. And I also did it because I had a thought. A quiet, specific, patient thought. I did it because I knew something about that wedding that the people around the wedding did not know. I knew what the company was going to be worth in 6 months. I had not announced this to my family. I had not announced it to anyone outside of my core team and my accountant and my attorney and the venture capital firm that had gone from a preliminary conversation to a serious conversation to a term sheet conversation in the 3 months since that Sunday in Fremont when my father had called it a hobby. We were in active negotiations for a Series A funding round. The firm was Meridian Capital, based in San Francisco. They were not the largest firm in the valley, but they were serious, and they were specific about the sectors they invested in, and they had done their due diligence on Clearledger with a thoroughness that had taken 12 weeks, and had produced at the end of those 12 weeks a term sheet. The term sheet proposed a funding amount of $8 million, at a pre-money valuation of $42 million, which post-money placed Clearledger's valuation at $50 million. I had the term sheet in a drawer in my desk at the office. I had reviewed it with my attorney 4 times. I was in the final weeks of negotiation before signing. Nobody in my family knew. I had made a specific and intentional decision not to tell them until the deal was closed. Not because I wanted to hide it, because I had learned that telling my family things before they were complete produced the specific dampening response I could not absorb, and I needed all of my energy in the final weeks of this negotiation to be pointed at the negotiation rather than at managing my parents' reaction to news that had not yet materialized. So I kept quiet. I wrote a check for $25,000. I gave it to Amanda with a hug and told her I was glad I could help. She held me for a moment and said, "You are the best sister." I said, "I know, remember that." She laughed. She did not know I meant it in the specific way I meant it, which was that I was asking her to remember it, because there was something coming that was going to reorganize a lot of things, and I wanted her to have this moment of warmth to hold on to before the reorganization. The deal with Meridian Capital closed 6 weeks before the wedding. Clearledger's Series A was announced internally to my team and my advisors on a Thursday morning in March. We did not do a public announcement. I am not a press release person. I am a build things person. I did not tell my parents. I did not tell Amanda. I did not tell anyone in my family. I put the term sheet and the signed closing documents in a folder in my bag. And I waited for Scottsdale. Because the Whitmore rehearsal dinner was in 6 weeks, and Patricia Whitmore was going to ask me what I did for a living. I knew this because Patricia Whitmore had asked me some version of this question every time I had been in the same room with her. She was not unkind about it. She was precise about it. She was the kind of woman who organized her understanding of people around what they produced in the world, and she had not yet been able to organize her understanding of me, because what I produced in the world did not fit the categories she had available. She was going to ask again, and this time I was going to have an answer that fit a category she absolutely had. $50 million fits every category. The rehearsal dinner was held at a restaurant called Ember and Stone in Old Town Scottsdale. Private dining room, dark wood, good lighting, the kind of restaurant that communicates a certain level of occasion without being so formal that it creates distance. The Whitmore family had chosen it, which made sense because it was the kind of place the Whitmore family moved through naturally. I drove to Scottsdale from San Francisco. Not flew, drove. I'm a person who processes things better in motion, and I had a lot to process before that dinner. I took the I-5 south, and then the I-10 east, and I drove through the Central Valley and the desert with the windows down and the radio low, and I thought about everything I wanted to say and everything I was not going to say, and the one piece of paper in the folder in my bag. I arrived at my hotel on Thursday afternoon. The rehearsal was Friday, the dinner was Friday evening, the wedding was Saturday. I texted Amanda when I arrived. She was already at the Whitmore family home in Scottsdale proper, with Brandon and his parents doing the final wedding prep things that happened the day before. She texted back a string of emojis, and then called me 40 seconds later, because Amanda does not do emojis when she can do a phone call. She said, "You are here, I cannot believe you are here." I said I would be here. She said, "I know, but it is different when you are actually here. Thank you for everything, for the 25,000 and for coming and for being you." I said, "You already thanked me." She said, "I am thanking you again." I said, "Stop thanking me and go enjoy the last 24 hours of your life as Amanda Chen." She laughed. She said, "Tomorrow night at the dinner, Patricia is going to ask you about the company again, just so you know." I said, "I am aware." She said, "She is not trying to be rude, she just cannot figure out where to put you." I said, "I know." She said, "Are you going to be okay with it?" I said, "Amanda." She said, "Yeah." I said, "Tomorrow night is going to be interesting." There was a pause. She said, "What does that mean?" I said, "It means I will see you at the rehearsal tomorrow." She said, "Nadia, what are you planning?" I said, "Nothing bad, I promise." She said, "That is not reassuring." I said, "Good night, Amanda." She was quiet for a moment, then she said, "Okay, good night, I love you." I said, "I love you too, go sleep." The rehearsal on Friday afternoon was at a beautiful venue called Desert Bloom Estate on the outskirts of Scottsdale. a property with saguaro cactus and sunset views, and the specific light that Scottsdale has in April that makes everything look slightly golden. My parents arrived from California. My father was in his good suit, the navy one he wore to serious occasions. My mother was in a dress she had bought specifically for this event. They looked the way parents look at their child's wedding rehearsal, proud and emotional and slightly overwhelmed. My mother hugged me when I arrived. She held me for a moment and said, "I am glad you are here." I said, "Where else would I be?" My father shook my hand in the way he sometimes did instead of hugging, which I had long since stopped interpreting as distance and had come to understand as his specific language of acknowledgement. He said, "You look well." I said, "So do you." The rehearsal was warm and brief. Amanda was beautiful even in rehearsal in a floral sundress and no makeup, the way she always looked most like herself. Brandon was attentive and calm in the way of someone who is genuinely happy with their life. The Whitmores were gracious hosts. Patricia Whitmore found me after the rehearsal, while people were milling around and the event coordinator was going through logistics for Saturday. She said, "Nadia, it is lovely to see you again." I said, "You as well." She said, "How are things going with the business?" There it was, the appetizer question before the full version at dinner. I said, "Very well, thank you. We have had a significant development recently that I am looking forward to sharing." She received this with a warm, politely uncertain expression. She said, "Oh, how lovely. We will have to hear all about it at dinner." I said, "I think you will find it interesting." She smiled. She moved on. The dinner was at 7. I arrived at Ember and Stone at 6:50, which meant I was the first person at the private dining room. The table was set for 22 people, name cards at each seat, candles lit, menus already placed. The room had a warm amber light and a view through glass doors to a small outdoor patio, and beyond that the Scottsdale evening sky. I found my seat, I sat down. I reached into my bag. I took out the folder. I did not open it. I just placed it on the table beside my place setting, where it would be within reach when the moment came. I ordered water. I looked at the menu without reading it. People began to arrive. My parents, my father straightening his tie as he came in the door. Amanda and Brandon, her hand in his, looking like exactly what they were. Tom Whitmore, big and easygoing in a blazer. Patricia Whitmore, precise and beautiful in a silk blouse. Brandon's brother and his girlfriend. Various cousins and close friends filling the remaining seats. The room filled. Conversation began in the way of a dinner, with people who know each other well mixed with people who are still navigating knowing each other. My father found himself seated near Tom Whitmore, and they fell into a comfortable enough conversation about Bay Area traffic versus Arizona traffic, which is the kind of conversation that middle-aged men of a certain type fall into instinctively when they do not know each other well enough for the real conversation, but like each other enough to want a conversation. My mother was next to one of Amanda's college friends, and was doing the specific social performance she did at events like this, warm and interested, and saying just the right amount. I was seated across from Patricia Whitmore. Of course I was. I wondered briefly if Amanda had influenced the seating chart. She absolutely had. I would ask her about it later, and she would deny it with the specific guilty amusement of someone who is absolutely guilty. The first course came. Salads. The conversation moved around the table in the way of a large dinner, topics emerging and dissolving, people dipping in and out of different threads. Patricia was engaged and warm across from me. She asked about San Francisco. She asked about the drive down. She asked what I thought of the venue which she and Tom had helped select. I was engaged back. I am not a person who makes social situations difficult. I know how to be in a room. I know how to listen and respond and contribute without forcing. The second course arrived, a salmon option and a beef option. The table was fully in conversation now, the warming-up phase complete and the real dinner energy present. And then in the way of these things, a slight natural pause arrived in the larger conversation at our end of the table. Not a silence exactly, a breath between topics. Patricia looked at me across the plates and the candles and the wine glasses. She said, "Nadia, I remember you mentioned at the rehearsal that there had been a development with your business." She said it pleasantly, with genuine enough interest, but also with the specific framing of someone who is offering a space for you to fill in a way that they already have expectations about the dimensions of. Several people at our end of the table had caught the question. My father had caught it from 3 seats down, my mother had caught it, Brandon's brother was half listening. My father, I noticed, was doing the thing he did when the company came up in a social setting. A very slight tightening, a preparation for the small internal management of whatever complicated mix of pride and uncertainty and hope that the subject produced in him. I looked at Patricia. I said, yes, I would love to share that. Actually, I think it might be easier to show you than to describe it. I reached into my bag. I took out the folder. I opened it. I took out the single piece of paper on top of the stack. It was not the full term sheet. The full term sheet was a 40-page document full of legal language. What I had printed on this single piece of paper was the relevant summary. The company name, the funding amount, the pre-money valuation, the post-money valuation, my equity percentage and what that equity was worth at current valuation. I placed it on the table, face up, in the center of the space between me and Patricia Whitmore. She looked down at it. She read it. I watched her read it. She read it for approximately 7 seconds, which is about right for how long it takes to read a single page, when the number on the page is large enough that your brain reads it twice. She looked up at me. She said, $50 million. Not a question, a statement, a recalibration. I said, the company valuation as of last month, following our Series A funding round. The table went quiet. Not because I had announced it dramatically. I had not raised my voice. I had not prefaced it with anything designed to draw attention. I had simply placed a piece of paper on a table and answered a question. But the words had travelled, and the number had travelled, and the quiet spread from Patricia outward like a stone, dropped in still water. Tom Whitmore leaned slightly forward to see the paper. Brandon looked at it, and then at me with an expression that was entirely genuine surprise. Amanda, seated at the far end of the table, had not heard the specific words but had seen the paper come out of the folder, and was watching my face with the expression of someone who has been wondering what was coming, and has just started to understand the shape of it. My father. I need to tell you about my father's face. He was 3 seats down, angled toward me, and he had heard Patricia say the number, $50 million. He had heard it clearly in the dinner quiet room, and I watched his face do something I had not seen it do in 32 years of being his daughter. It went through several things very fast. First, the information arriving. Second, the information being processed against the framework he had built over 4 years of calling the company a hobby and expressing worry about stability and asking when I was getting a real job. Third, the framework proving insufficient. Fourth, something beneath the framework, something older and deeper that he did not often let to the surface, something that I recognized after a moment as the specific feeling of a father who has just understood that his daughter did something extraordinary while he was not watching. My mother was sitting beside him. She had heard it too. Her face was different from his, more immediate, more present tense, less about recalibration and more about the simple shock of a number that was very large. She said to no one in particular, 50 million. It was barely a whisper. Patricia Whitmore looked at me with an expression that was nothing like the pleasant, organizing, politely uncertain look she had been giving me for the past year, and a half every time the company had come up. She said, "You built this company yourself." I said, "With a team I hired, 14 employees now." She said, "In how many years?" I said, "We closed our 3rd full year of operation last month." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "That is remarkable." And she meant it. I could hear the difference between Patricia meaning something and Patricia being polite. She meant this. I said, "Thank you." The dinner came back to itself slowly. People found their words. The conversation resumed, but differently, with the specific energy of a room that has just received information that has rearranged things and is still settling around the new shape. Brandon leaned across the table at some point during dessert and said quietly to me, "Clear Ledger, I have seen that name. One of my colleagues uses it." I said, "I know, his name is Derek Park. He has been a client for 8 months. He referred 2 other clients in your industry. Brandon stared at me. He said, "You already knew." I said, "I know my client list." He shook his head slowly, smiling. He said, "Amanda said you were something else. I think I underestimated what she meant." I said, "Most people do." Later in the evening, while dessert was being cleared, and people were standing and shifting into the end-of-dinner conversations that are different from the seated ones, my father came and stood beside me. He was holding his wine glass. He had not drunk much of it. He had the specific manner of someone who has been thinking all evening and has arrived at something they need to say. He said, "Nadia." I said, "Dad." He looked at his glass for a moment. He said, "I did not know." I said, "I know." He said, "I said things about the hobby, about a real job." I said, "You were worried about me." He said, "I did not understand what you were building." I said, "I know you did not." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said quietly, in the way of a man who does not say things like this easily, "I am proud of you." 3 words from my father, said quietly in a restaurant in Scottsdale with the dessert plates being cleared around us. "I am proud of you." I had been building toward those words for 4 years without knowing I was building toward them. I had told myself and mostly believed that I was building for the clients and for the team and for the thing itself, and all of that was true. But underneath it, in the place underneath all the professional architecture, there was a daughter who had wanted her father to see what she was building and call it real. He was calling it real now. 4 years late. In a restaurant in Scottsdale. But real. I said, "Thank you, Dad." He nodded. He put his hand on my shoulder briefly, the specific gesture of my father's affection. He went back to where my mother was standing. I watched him go. The wedding was on Saturday. I want to tell you about the wedding, because the wedding is where the story settles into something different from what it has been. Up to this point, the story has the shape of a build-up and a payoff, the dismissed startup, the forced contribution, the dinner table moment, the $50 million paper, the room going quiet, the recalibration. But the wedding day is where the story becomes something more complicated and more honest, because the wedding day is where I had to figure out what I actually wanted from all of it. I woke up at 7 in my hotel room on Saturday morning. The Scottsdale April morning was exactly what Scottsdale April mornings are, dry and clear and bright in a way that feels like someone has turned up the contrast slightly from how the rest of the world looks. The mountains in the distance were already lit. I made coffee with the hotel machine and sat by the window. I thought about the night before. I thought about Patricia Whitmore's face when she read the number. I thought about Tom Whitmore leaning forward. I thought about Brandon's expression. I thought about my mother's whispered repetition of 50 million into the dinner air. I thought about my father. "I am proud of you." And I sat with a question that I had not expected to need to sit with that morning. What had I wanted from that moment? I had planned it. I will not pretend otherwise. I had put that paper in my bag deliberately. I had known Patricia was going to ask the question. I had prepared to answer it in that specific way because I had wanted the room to have the information in a moment that was visible to everyone, rather than a private conversation that could be softened or reframed or managed. I had wanted it to be witnessed. But why? Was it because my parents deserved to be embarrassed? Was it because Patricia deserved to be corrected? Was it because I had been carrying 4 years of dismissal and I had wanted a public moment of proof? I sat with the coffee by the window and I was honest with myself. There was some of that. I will not pretend there was not some of that. There was a part of me that had wanted the room to go quiet, and for the people who had used the word hobby to hear the number and feel the distance between the word and the number. But that was not the whole of it. The deeper thing, the real thing underneath the satisfaction of the moment, was something else. I had wanted to be seen. Not to be impressive, not to win a comparison, to be seen, to be understood, to have the thing I had been building for 4 years acknowledged as the thing it actually was, not the thing people had decided it was without looking carefully enough. My parents had not looked carefully enough because they did not have the tools to see what I was building. They had the tools to see a stable job and a reliable salary, and the kind of structure they had built their entire understanding of success around. They did not have the tools to see a product that was solving a real problem for real businesses and growing month by month and building toward a valuation that none of us could have told you would be $50 million 4 years ago. They had not looked carefully enough because the category did not exist in their vocabulary. And I had spent 4 years wanting the category to be created. That is what the dinner table moment was. Not revenge, not victory. The creation of a category. The moment where the number was large enough and visible enough and documented enough that even the vocabulary that had not had room for what I was building had to make room. I finished my coffee. I got dressed. I went to my sister's wedding. The ceremony was at Desert Bloom Estate as planned, in the late afternoon when the light was what Scottsdale light is supposed to be, and the saguaro cactus stood in the background of photographs, and the mountains were everything the photographs required. Amanda was breathtaking in the specific way of people who are exactly where they are supposed to be. Brandon cried a little during the vows, which made Amanda cry a little, which made my mother cry completely, which made my father produce a handkerchief that I had not known he carried. I stood in the front row. I watched my sister get married, and I felt simply and fully happy for her. Not complicated happy, not mixed happy, just happy because she was happy, because Brandon was exactly the right person, because the day was beautiful and the people in it were the people I loved, and for one afternoon the only thing that needed to be true was that Amanda Chen was marrying Brandon Whitmore in the Scottsdale sunshine, and it was good. Patricia Whitmore found me during the cocktail hour. She came to me directly, which was different from the way she had been moving toward me at previous events, where the movement had always been a detour rather than a destination. She said, "Nadia, can I say something?" I said, "Of course." She said, "I owe you an apology." I looked at her. She said, "I have been asking about your work at every event we have been at together, and the way I have been asking it, I realize now, was the question of someone who did not take the answer seriously before she heard it, and that was not fair to you." I said, "Patricia." She said, "Let me finish. I know what a Series A at that valuation means. My husband has done deals in this space. I know what it takes to build a company to that point in 3 years, and I should have been more curious about what you were building long before I saw that paper." I said, "You are being very honest." She said, "I am a precise person. Precision requires honesty about your own errors as well." I said, "I appreciate that." She said, "I also want to say that what you did for Amanda, the contribution to the wedding, that was generous, more generous than I knew at the time, and I am grateful." I said, "She is my sister." She said, "Yes, and you are a remarkable person." She held out her hand. I shook it. And then she said something that I did not expect. She said, "One of my husband's portfolio companies is looking for financial analytics software. I would like to introduce you to their CFO." I said, "I would appreciate that very much." She said, "Consider it done." She went back to the cocktail party. I stood for a moment by the edge of the outdoor space where the party was happening. I thought about the folder in my bag. One piece of paper. The number that had been true for 6 weeks before anyone in my family knew it was true. The number that had been building toward being true for 4 years before that. I thought about my father saying, "I am proud of you" in the restaurant the night before. I thought about my mother's face. I thought about Patricia's handshake. I thought about Amanda in her wedding dress saying, "You are the best sister," in the specific tone of someone who had no idea how specific she was being. Here is what I understood standing by the edge of that cocktail party in the Scottsdale April light. The $50 million valuation was real. But it was not the thing. The thing was 14 people who showed up to work every morning to build something they believed in. The thing was 50 clients who could finally see their own business clearly. The thing was the restaurant owner in Oakland who said, "I finally understand where my money goes." The thing was 4 years of Sunday evenings and late Tuesday nights and decisions made alone in a room where no one was watching, building something honest, because I believed that building honest things was the only way to build. The number was a truth about those things, a public, legible, irrefutable truth. But the things existed before the number. They will exist after the number changes. They are the actual substance of what I built. My parents called it a hobby because they could not see it. Now they can see it. But I want to be clear about something. I did not build it so they could see it. I built it because it was real and because I could see it. Their seeing it was an outcome, it was not the purpose. The purpose was the work. The purpose was always the work. My mother found me near the bar during the reception. She was holding a glass of champagne that she had been nursing since the ceremony. She had the specific expression of someone who has been doing a lot of thinking since the previous evening and has arrived at something they need to say. She said, "Nadia." I said, "Mom." She said, $50 million. I said, "Yes." She said, "Your company." I said, "My company." She looked at me. She said, "I did not understand what you were doing." I said, "I know." She said, "I thought you were being reckless. I thought you were choosing risk when there was a safer way." I said, "I know that too." She said, "I said things about Amanda's life, about what a real life looked like." I said, "Mom." She said, "I am sorry, Nadia." The word sorry from my mother. My mother, who was not a woman who said sorry easily, because saying sorry required acknowledging that you had been wrong, and acknowledging that you had been wrong was a specific kind of vulnerable that she moved through life trying to avoid. She said it. I said, "I know you were coming from love, both of you, I always knew that." She said, "But we did not see you." I said, "You see me now." She looked at me for a moment, and then she did something she had not done since I was small. She pulled me into a hug, and she held it for longer than she usually held anything. I let her. The wedding reception continued around us. Music and dancing and toasts and the beautiful noise of a celebration that was exactly what it was supposed to be. Amanda found me later in the evening when the dancing was in full swing, and the champagne had been refreshed 3 times, and the room had the specific warm happiness of a wedding that has been exactly right. She leaned close to say something over the music. She said, "Patricia Whitmore told me she is introducing you to a client." I said, "She mentioned it." Amanda said, "She told me you were remarkable." I said, "She told me the same." Amanda leaned back and looked at me in the specific way of a younger sister, looking at an older one when she is very proud and also slightly in awe, and also slightly competitive about it in the good-natured way that sisters are. She said, "You planned all of that." I said, "I did not plan for it to be at your rehearsal dinner." She said, "But you planned to bring the paper." I said, "I brought the paper." She said, "And you did not tell me." I said, "I was not keeping it from you. I was keeping it for the right moment." She said, "The right moment was when Patricia Whitmore asked the question for the 15th time." I said, "She only asked 11 times, I counted." Amanda laughed, the real laugh, the full one. She said, "I love you." I said, "I love you too. You owe me $25,000, by the way." She laughed again and punched my arm lightly and went back to her new husband. I watched her go. I thought about what the money had cost me and what it had been worth. Not in the simple transaction sense, in the full sense, what the 4 years had cost and what they had built, what the forced contribution had cost and what it had revealed about my family and about myself. The $25,000 had come from a company that was worth $50 million. The 4 years of building had produced a team of 14 and 50 clients and a product that made people's businesses clearer. The dismissal had produced something too. Not anger, not vindication, something more useful than either. A very deep certainty about what mattered. About why I built. About whose opinion of the work I was building for. I built for the work. I built for the clients. I built for the 14 people on my team who chose to bet their time on something I was building. The $50 million number was the number those choices produced when you added them up correctly. My parents were proud of me now. Patricia Whitmore had shaken my hand. And those things were good, and I received them without pretending they did not matter. But they were not the reason. They were never the reason. I took my shoes off and went out onto the dance floor. Amanda pulled me into the group with one arm and her new husband on the other side. And the dancing got exactly as messy and wonderful as a wedding dance is supposed to get. And I was present. Completely present. Not thinking about the number or the paper or the room going quiet. Just present. Just here. In the life I had built. I have been thinking in the weeks since that wedding about what the lesson of this story actually is. Because there are several possible lessons, and not all of them are the right ones, and I want to be honest with you about which one is. The easy lesson is the satisfying one. Do not let people dismiss what you are building. Stay the course. Success is the best response. The number eventually speaks louder than the doubt. That is all true. But it is not the deepest true thing. The deepest true thing is this. My parents called my company a stupid hobby for 4 years. They said those things because they loved me and they were afraid for me, and they did not have the vocabulary to understand what I was building. They were not trying to diminish me. They were trying to protect me using the only map they had. The map was wrong, but the love behind it was real. I know this because I have watched my father for 32 years, and the man who said I am proud of you in that restaurant is the same man who stayed at a company for 27 years to make sure his family had health insurance and a mortgage payment and the specific safety that he had never had growing up. He expressed love in the language of stability because stability was the most important thing he had ever provided. He just could not see that I was providing stability too, in a different form, in the form of something I built. He sees it now. That is what the paper was for. Not to win. To be seen. And if you are building something right now, in the years when no one is watching and the people who love you are worried, I want to say this to you directly. Keep building. Not to prove the doubters wrong, not to get the moment when the room goes quiet, not for the number on the paper. Build because the thing you are building is real. Build because it solves something or makes something better or fills a gap that you are uniquely positioned to fill. Build because the work itself is the point and the outcomes of the work are what happens when you do the work honestly for long enough. The room going quiet is satisfying, but it is not the destination. The destination is the work. It was always the work. Like this video if this story reached you, if you have ever had someone call your dream a hobby or a phase or a risk not worth taking, one tap, that is all. Subscribe and turn on the bell. We are here every single week with a story that does not go where you expect it to go. Share this with someone who is building something right now that the people around them do not understand yet. Someone who needs to hear that the not yet understanding is not the final word. And drop a comment below. Tell me what you are building that the people around you cannot see yet. I want to know. I am reading every single one. I will see you in the next one.